You hear them before you see them. Deep warning calls echo across the open grassland as dozens of enormous primates burst into motion. Mothers clutch their young. Massive males bare dagger-like canine teeth and charge toward the threat instead of running from it. For most predators, this would be the moment to retreat. But these hunters don't. They tighten their circle, shouting, throwing stones, and advancing with sharpened wooden spears. There is no steel, no bows, no armor, only determination, cooperation, and the courage to confront one of the most intimidating primates that ever lived. These are not modern humans. They lived hundreds of thousands of years before our own species appeared, yet they willingly pursued prey that could fight back with terrifying strength. A fully grown Theropithecus oswaldi rivaled a female gorilla in size, possessed crushing muscles and razor-sharp canines, and lived in tightly bonded groups that fiercely defended one another. On paper, it seems like exactly the kind of animal our ancestors should have avoided. So why didn't they? Why would ancient hunters armed with little more than stone tools and wooden weapons deliberately seek out such a dangerous opponent when the African landscape offered countless other sources of food? Was it simply a matter of survival? Or did these perilous hunts reveal something far more profound about the evolution of the human mind? The answers begin in an unassuming corner of southern Kenya known as Olorgesailie. Today it appears quiet, almost ordinary, but hundreds of thousands of years ago this landscape overlooked the shores of an ancient lake that drew animals from across the surrounding plains. Generation after generation, early humans returned here, leaving behind subtle traces of their lives. Those traces have become one of archaeology's most intriguing windows into the behavior of our distant ancestors, revealing clues that continue to reshape how we understand intelligence, cooperation, and the extraordinary risks early humans were willing to take. 4 to 700,000 years ago, East Africa looked familiar enough to recognize, yet different enough to feel like another world. The Great Rift Valley stretched across the landscape much as it does today, but its climate shifted constantly between wetter and drier periods. Lakes expanded and contracted with the seasons and changing rainfall, transforming the surrounding plains into a patchwork of grasslands, marshes, and scattered woodlands. One of these lakes lay beside what is now Olorgesailie, creating a natural oasis where water remained available long after the surrounding countryside had begun to dry. Wherever water gathered, life followed. Every day brought an extraordinary parade of animals to its shores. Herds of zebra grazed on the open plains while antelope browsed nearby. Giraffes reached into the acacia trees, elephants carved paths through the vegetation, and hippopotamuses crowded the shallows. Smaller creatures, from turtles to fish, thrived along the lake's edge, while predators silently watched for an opportunity. For early humans, this was both a paradise and a battlefield. The same landscape that offered food also concentrated some of Africa's most dangerous animals into a relatively small area. It was here that generations of hominins established temporary camps, returning again and again over hundreds of thousands of years. The fossil evidence cannot tell us exactly which species occupied Olorgesailie during every phase of its history. But by this period, Homo erectus had already spread across much of the Old World, while newer human relatives with larger brains and more modern anatomy were beginning to emerge. Regardless of the exact species, the people who lived here shared one defining characteristic. They were remarkably skilled survivors. Their greatest technological achievement was deceptively simple. Scattered across Olorgesailie are thousands of carefully shaped Acheulean handaxes, tools first developed nearly 1.7 million years earlier and refined over countless generations. Crafted from stone with deliberate symmetry, these handaxes served as multi-purpose instruments capable of butchering carcasses, cutting wood, scraping hides, and perhaps even delivering powerful blows in close combat. They were portable toolkits that reflected planning, patience, and an increasingly sophisticated understanding of stone craftsmanship. Stone alone, however, was unlikely to win a confrontation with large game. Archaeologists believe these hunters also carried sharpened wooden spears, weapons that rarely survive in the fossil record, but almost certainly played a central role in their lives. Combined with accurate throwing, coordinated movement, and intimate knowledge of the landscape, these simple tools allowed early humans to challenge animals far larger than themselves. Yet they remained physically vulnerable. They lacked claws, fangs, thick hides, and overwhelming strength. Against almost every large animal on the African plains, a single mistake could be fatal. Survival depended not on brute force, but on intelligence, communication, and cooperation, qualities that would soon be tested against an opponent unlike almost any other. Among the countless animals that wandered the shores of ancient Olorgesailie, one stood apart from all the others. It wasn't the largest, it wasn't the fastest, but it may have been the most intimidating prey an early human could deliberately choose to hunt. Its name was Theropithecus oswaldi, a giant relative of a primate that still survives today in the Ethiopian highlands. If you've ever seen a troop of modern geladas, you've already met its closest living descendant. Geladas spend much of their lives grazing on grass across steep mountain slopes, living in large social groups dominated by powerful males. At first glance, they appear almost peaceful, but that illusion disappears the moment rival groups collide. Dominant males lunge at one another with mouths stretched impossibly wide, exposing canine teeth designed less for eating than for fighting. Violent disputes over territory and mates can leave faces torn apart, while younger males constantly search for opportunities to challenge established leaders. Now imagine that same animal scaled up dramatically. Where an adult male gelada typically weighs around 40 pounds, Theropithecus oswaldi commonly reached nearly 140 pounds, with the largest individuals approaching 160. That placed them in the same weight class as a female gorilla and made them several times larger than most baboons alive today. Their limbs were thick with muscle, their jaws immensely powerful, and their canines capable of inflicting devastating wounds. A charging male would have been an overwhelming sight, especially for hunters who rarely exceeded 5.5 feet in height and often weighed considerably less than their opponent. Despite their size, these primates probably looked surprisingly familiar. Researchers believe they shared many features with modern geladas, including a robust body covered in shaggy fur, a dark face framed by a heavy mane, and perhaps even the distinctive patch of exposed skin across the chest that gives living geladas their unmistakable appearance. Yet every feature had been exaggerated by evolution into something larger and more imposing. Fortunately for any predator, Theropithecus oswaldi appears to have inherited one important weakness. Like modern geladas, it was highly adapted for life on the ground. Unlike many monkeys, it was not an agile tree climber, and evidence suggests it may have been even less capable of escaping into branches than its living relatives. That limitation likely made it more accessible than arboreal primates, but accessibility should never be confused with vulnerability. These animals lived in complex social groups where protection was a collective responsibility. A dominant male defended several females and their offspring, while subordinate males remained nearby, creating a formidable defensive network. Threaten a juvenile, and you were unlikely to face just one angry primate. You could find yourself confronting an entire troop determined to fight back. Every warning call could summon reinforcements. Every failed attack risked turning hunter into prey. Viewed from that perspective, the decision to target these animals borders on the unbelievable. The African plains offered antelope, fish, turtles, edible plants, and countless other resources that demanded far less risk. Even if a young Theropithecus could occasionally be isolated, the hunt would require careful planning, precise coordination, and nerves of steel. Choosing such dangerous prey seems almost irrational, which is precisely why the evidence uncovered at Olorgesailie has fascinated archaeologists for decades. Somewhere in this landscape lies the explanation for why ancient humans repeatedly accepted odds that most predators would have avoided. If the story ended there, Theropithecus oswaldi would remain little more than another impressive Ice Age animal. We could admire its size, speculate about its behavior, and move on. Instead, archaeologists uncovered something so unexpected that it transformed an obscure fossil site into one of the most intriguing windows into prehistoric hunting. Scattered across a relatively small area at Olorgesailie lay thousands of carefully crafted stone tools alongside the remains of nearly 90 Theropithecus individuals. This was no random collection of bones washed together by floodwaters. The concentration was extraordinary. Giant primates are already uncommon in the fossil record, yet here dozens of them appeared in one location, surrounded by evidence of repeated human activity. It was the kind of discovery that immediately demanded an explanation. The first question was simple. How did all of these animals end up here? Researchers proposed three possibilities. Perhaps a non-human predator, such as a large carnivore, had accumulated the remains over time. Alternatively, the bones might represent the work of ancient hominins that hunted, transported, and butchered the animals. A third possibility suggested that disease, drought, or starvation had caused a natural die-off, with the bones later broken apart by geological processes or scavengers. At first glance, each explanation seemed plausible. Only a careful examination of the evidence could determine which one best fit the facts. The age profile of the animals provided the first important clue. Of the 90 identified individuals, 76 were juveniles, while only 14 were adults. Even more revealing, around 70% were between 6 months and 3 years old. Modern gelada populations simply do not contain such a high proportion of young animals at any given time. If an entire troop had died naturally from a sudden catastrophe, researchers would expect a mortality pattern that reflected the whole population more evenly. Instead, the remains resembled what archaeologists call attritional mortality. Rather than representing one catastrophic event, the assemblage appeared to result from repeated losses over time, with younger, smaller, and more vulnerable individuals being disproportionately represented. That pattern fits remarkably well with the behavior of predators, whether human or animal, because juveniles are generally easier and less dangerous to capture than fully grown adults. The bones themselves told an even more compelling story. Nearly every skeleton had been broken apart in consistent ways. Long bones displayed extensive flaking, splintering, and clean breaks around the joints. These fractures were not random cracks produced by weathering or the weight of sediment. They followed repeated patterns that suggested deliberate processing. Muscles had been separated from their attachments, and the bones had been fractured methodically, almost as though the same sequence of actions had been performed again and again. Curiously, researchers found very few cut marks. At first, that might seem to weaken the argument for butchery, but the absence of cuts is not as surprising as it appears. Stone handaxes are capable of removing flesh while leaving relatively little evidence on certain parts of the skeleton, especially after hundreds of thousands of years of weathering. What mattered more was the overall pattern. The consistent breakage, the association with thousands of Acheulean tools, and the concentration of remains all pointed in the same direction. The alternative explanations gradually became more difficult to defend. A large carnivore would leave distinctive tooth marks and produce a different pattern of skeletal damage. Natural deaths would not selectively accumulate mostly juveniles before systematically breaking nearly every bone in similar ways. Piece by piece, the evidence eliminated the simplest explanations until one remained the strongest. These giant primates were almost certainly being hunted, carried back to camp, and processed by ancient humans, not once, but repeatedly over generations. That conclusion becomes even more convincing when viewed alongside discoveries from nearby Olduvai Gorge, where the skull of another Theropithecus bears a massive, fatal depression fracture consistent with a powerful blow from a club, a stone handaxe, or another handheld weapon. Although such finds are rare, they point toward the same remarkable possibility. Across parts of East Africa, early humans were not merely scavenging these formidable primates when opportunity presented itself. They were willing to confront them directly. The real mystery, however, was only beginning. If these hunts truly occurred, how did lightly armed hominins overcome an animal that could easily overpower any one of them alone? The archaeological evidence cannot preserve every moment of the chase. No footprints record the hunter's movements. No wooden spears have survived at Olorgesailie. We are left with scattered clues, broken bones, stone tools, and the behavior of living animals to reconstruct events that unfolded hundreds of thousands of years ago. Like detectives at an ancient crime scene, archaeologists can identify what almost certainly occurred while remaining cautious about the details. One clue stands above the rest. The overwhelming majority of the Theropithecus remains belong to juveniles rather than fully grown adults. That pattern strongly suggests the hunters were not recklessly charging into the middle of a troop to fight dominant males head-on. Instead, they appear to have focused on younger individuals that could be separated from the group. This would have minimized risk while still providing a substantial amount of meat. Exactly how they accomplished that remains uncertain, But comparisons with modern hunter-gatherers offer intriguing possibilities. These comparisons are not evidence that ancient humans behaved identically. Rather, they provide examples of strategies that people armed with simple technology have used in comparable situations. Among the Hadza of Tanzania, for instance, hunters have occasionally pursued baboons by surrounding the area where the troop is resting. Loud shouting and coordinated movement force the animals to flee in different directions. As individuals attempt to escape the encirclement, hunters waiting along likely exit routes can strike them with clubs or other weapons. The goal is not to fight the entire troop at once. It is to create confusion, isolate vulnerable animals, and exploit the brief moments when social cohesion breaks down. Whether the hunters of Olorgesailie used this exact strategy, we cannot know. The archaeological record simply does not preserve that level of detail. Yet the underlying principle fits remarkably well with the evidence. A coordinated group of hominins could have approached from several directions, using noise, thrown stones, and aggressive displays to fragment the troop. During the chaos, a younger Theropithecus might hesitate, become separated from its mother, or take the wrong escape route. For a few critical seconds, the balance of power would shift. Those seconds may have made all the difference. Unlike lions or leopards, early humans possessed a unique advantage that evolution had been quietly refining for hundreds of thousands of years: exceptional throwing ability. Our shoulders, flexible waists, long legs, and mobile wrists allow us to launch projectiles with remarkable speed and accuracy. Evidence from fossil anatomy suggests that by this period, many hominins already possessed much of this capability. Even before the invention of bows, they could turn rocks and wooden spears into weapons that struck from a distance. Distance changed everything. Instead of wrestling a powerful primate in close combat, hunters could weaken it before ever coming within reach of its canines. A barrage of stones might slow its escape. A sharpened wooden spear could wound a leg or shoulder, reducing its mobility. Only after the animal had been exhausted or injured would the group move in together, armed with heavy handaxes and wooden clubs to deliver the final blows. None of those actions would have succeeded without extraordinary cooperation. Every hunter needed to understand their role. Some would block escape routes, others would drive the troop forward. Someone had to judge the right moment to throw. Someone else had to protect companions from a charging adult male. Panic or poor communication could quickly transform a carefully planned hunt into a disaster. This is perhaps the most profound lesson hidden within the bones at Olorgesailie. These hunters were relying on abilities that no stone tool can preserve: shared intentions, trust, communication, and the capacity to plan several steps ahead. Success depended not on the strength of any one individual, but on the ability of an entire group to function as a coordinated team. Long before cities, agriculture, or even our own species existed, the foundations of human cooperation were already being tested in some of the most dangerous encounters imaginable. Even if these hunters possessed the skill to bring down a giant primate, one question refuses to disappear. Why bother? Why risk injury or death for prey that could fight back so fiercely when the African landscape offered so many alternatives? The shores of ancient Olorgesailie were anything but barren. Hippos, zebras, antelope, giraffes, fish, turtles, edible plants, insects, and countless other resources were available throughout much of the year. Of course, none of these were guaranteed meals. Antelope could outrun almost any human. Elephants and buffalo were vastly more powerful. Hippopotamuses remain among the deadliest animals in Africa even today. From that perspective, Theropithecus oswaldi was not necessarily the most dangerous creature these hominins encountered. It was simply one of the most unusual. Its behavior may actually have offered opportunities that other prey did not. Living in predictable social groups and spending much of their time on the ground meant that troops could be located more reliably than fast-moving herds of grazing animals. Their limited climbing ability also reduced one avenue of escape. If hunters could isolate a juvenile, they may have found themselves pursuing prey that was easier to corner than a swift antelope crossing open grassland. Survival, however, may not tell the whole story. Some researchers have suggested that these hunts could have occurred seasonally, perhaps when environmental conditions made them more practical or when other food sources became less dependable. That idea remains a hypothesis, not a conclusion supported directly by the archaeological evidence. Another possibility is even more intriguing. In many recent hunter gatherer societies, successfully hunting difficult or dangerous animals brings more than meat. It brings prestige. Among some cultures, a successful hunter earns admiration, influence, and opportunities that extend well beyond the day's meal. Courage becomes visible. Skill is demonstrated before the entire community. The original research even raises the possibility that hunting Theropithecus carried a similar social value, perhaps functioning as a test of ability or a prestigious seasonal tradition. We have no direct evidence that this was the case at Olorgesailie, and it would be a mistake to project modern or recent cultural practices onto people who lived hundreds of thousands of years earlier. Still, the idea reminds us that human behavior has rarely been driven by calories alone. If these hunts did carry social significance, they hint at something remarkable. They suggest that cooperation was already producing rewards beyond immediate survival. A dangerous hunt demanded trust, planning, and collective effort, but it may also have strengthened relationships, reinforced reputations, and encouraged younger members of the group to master increasingly complex skills. In that sense, every successful hunt could have done more than feed a community. It could have reinforced the social bonds that allowed human societies to grow stronger with each generation. Whether they hunted giant primates for meat, opportunity, reputation, or some combination of all three, one conclusion seems unavoidable. These were not impulsive encounters between frightened animals. They were calculated risks undertaken by individuals who understood the value of working together. Long before the first villages or civilizations emerged, cooperation itself had become one of humanity's greatest survival tools, and perhaps its greatest evolutionary advantage. Picture that hunt once more. The warning calls echo across the grassland as a troop of giant primates scatters in every direction. Hunters move with purpose, each trusting the others to hold their position. A wounded juvenile breaks away, wooden spears fly through the air, and after a struggle lasting only minutes, another chapter of human history is written. When the excitement fades, what remains is more than a successful hunt. It is a glimpse into the minds of beings who were already thinking, planning, and solving problems in ways that feel profoundly familiar. For decades, discoveries at Olorgesailie have challenged the outdated image of early humans as little more than opportunistic scavengers surviving from one day to the next. Instead, they reveal hunters capable of weighing risk against reward, adapting to dangerous prey, and developing strategies that no single individual could have carried out alone. Whether they pursued Theropithecus for food, opportunity, or social status, these were calculated decisions rather than desperate acts of survival. The significance of those decisions extends far beyond a single hunt. Long before farms, cities, or written language existed, our ancestors were already developing the habits that would define humanity: planning ahead, sharing knowledge, dividing responsibilities, and pursuing goals that demanded patience instead of instinct. The roots of civilization did not suddenly appear with the first settlements. They were growing hundreds of thousands of years earlier, shaped by challenges that forced people to think beyond the present moment. The giant Theropithecus oswaldi has long since disappeared, and the hunters who pursued it vanished long before our own species appeared. Yet the choices they made still echo through us. Every time humans confront an impossible challenge by planning together, adapting, and building on one another's ideas, they are drawing on abilities forged in places like Olorgesailie. Long before cities rose, before writing, and before Homo sapiens existed, the foundations of human society were already taking shape along the ancient shores of an African lake.